Now, as a parent, you may have seen your child get something like this. They get an assignment to take home, and it's a very open ended assignment, meaning it's something along the lines of, explore this idea and figure out a strategy that you would use, or, solve it your own way and explain what that means. And it sounds great, right? I mean, of course, we want to teach children to think creatively. But what ends up happening is you see the child slowly become frustrated, and then they become overwhelmed, and they kind of shut down from the assignment because they don't really know where to start. Now, some students may figure it out, but a lot of students end up kind of feeling lost and overwhelmed. Now, this is why explicit instruction is so important, because it's not because students are lazy, like they can't figure this out creatively. And it doesn't mean that they lack creativity or that they lack intelligence. But essentially, with an open ended assignment like that, we're asking them to essentially work independently before a skill is clearly taught or mastered. But there's a misconception with explicit instruction. It's often viewed as just boring lecturing and just straight talking all the way through, with passive students who are just barely following along, and memorization over thinking, no creativity, no classroom discussions, no independence for the students. And it's not really entirely true. Explicit instruction is about teaching a skill directly, clearly, with guided practice, and then correcting errors along the way to gradually help students move toward independence. Now, a good example of this would be like a musician or an athlete. We don't ever give a musician a complex piece of music and say, hey, go figure it out on your own. And likewise, we don't take an athlete and just throw them into a live game for the first time and say, hey, go figure it out. Before that, we break skills down, we model it for them, and we have them practice that over and over until gradually they have more and more independence in more complex situations. And that's how academic learning should be handled as well. So the most important question is, how do students learn the most effectively, especially when they are novices to any skill or topic? Because a novice and an expert do not learn the same way. Hi, thanks for watching and thanks for tuning in to the Lil Will Learning Company. We offer structured academic tutoring and structured academic curriculum. And check out our Math Foundation Rebuild system. We have our book, Arithmetic from Beginning to End. And with that, we have a parent start guide, a math placement guide, a weekly rebuild plan, an arithmetic mastery checklist, and many other items to help parents fully implement the plan. It's a great value. And without further ado, let's look at why just letting students figure it out just doesn't always work. So first and foremost, there's this misconception that explicit instruction is just lecture. So we may see like a child who sits in a classroom and there's a teacher who's talking the whole time, maybe 30, 45 minutes straight, and the students are just listening along, barely able to pay attention and follow along. And people go, yeah, well, that must be what explicit instruction is, boring lectures. But that's not true at all. Explicit instruction is about clear directions. And so it involves a lot of modeling by the teacher, then a lot of guided practice. And that guided practice is meant to help the students learn the skill along with the teacher demonstrating it while they're doing that along with them. Now, during that guided practice, good teachers are modeling their thinking out loud about, how am I going to solve this? They give feedback, they correct mistakes from students, and it allows students to practice a skill along with the teacher in kind of a no pressure situation, because no matter what, the teacher's going to show them to the end result and the answer. And that guided practice is really important. And then just getting a lot of that repetition, that's a more clear picture of explicit instruction. And the whole point of that is to help them develop the skill to gradually get them to a point where they feel more confident and they're more fluent in that skill. and that will eventually guide them towards being more independent. So explicit instruction, it's not just students sitting passively. It means the adult just makes the learning more clear. Another truth behind this is that anyone who's a novice in a skill or topic, they're going to need more guidance anyway. So back to earlier, if a child is just given a complex problem and they're left to just essentially figure it out. The problem is a child doesn't really know where to even start. So, for example, they don't know what to look for. They don't know what even matters in the problem. They don't know what information they need to organize, and they don't know what patterns to look for yet. So, an important idea, someone who's a novice at a skill versus an expert, they don't look at the information in the same way. Someone who is an expert, let's just say a student who has more knowledge in a skill or topic, they can explore it more productively. But a novice, they just need more guidance along the way. We can go look at the example of learning an instrument. A beginner musician, they can't just be given a piece by Beethoven or Vivaldi and just start playing it. They need to know notes and timing and rhythm and small patterns, what a measure even is. Same for an athlete. They can't just go right into a game and just start to play. They need to learn stance and movement and technique and positioning and offensive and defensive strategy. So there's more to it. They need to practice those things and combine them all together over a period of time. So this is not about limiting a student. This is just how skills are built. And academic learning is really no different. And there's research by Kirshner, Sweller, and Clark that basically shows that if students are given minimally guided instruction, it's just very ineffective, especially for novices. And let's be honest, most students are novices anyway. When we give them too much at once, they become just overwhelmed. And this is not to say that students shouldn't think creatively and shouldn't explore and shouldn't think independently and solve complex problems creatively. It's just that i- all that becomes more productive once they have enough knowledge and skills practiced and built in. We shouldn't be leaving students to basically to discover things that they have not yet had the chance to practice yet. Now, when it comes to more complex problems in working memory, small steps help protect working memory. So, for example, if we give a child a really, really complex problem, and naturally they're going to become very overwhelmed. So, as a parent or teacher, that could seem like, well, they have a lack of focus, or they're just not trying hard enough, or all of the above. But the fact is, they're overwhelmed. That's all it really comes down to. And this is a problem with instruction that moves too quickly or skips steps and basically presents way too many ideas at once. Basically, what's happening for the child when this happens is that the lesson is outpacing their processing capacity. Good explicit instruction can break material down into small steps in these manageable chunks, lots of clear examples, and there needs to be a sequence of practice that goes along with it. And there's even Rosenshine's research, which basically shows that when you present new information in smaller steps, it and then you also check for a lot of understanding, that helps novices a lot more for understanding topics, especially more complex topics. So this is not like, oh, we need to just lower the standards or water down the material. No, this is making sure we're still teaching complex topics and ideas and skills. Just you have to scaffold it and break it down into manageable chunks and steps for students. Small steps don't weaken instruction. Small steps make challenging learning and more complex learning possible later. Now, guided practice stabilizes learning. So let's take this example. Let's say we have a child who they seem to understand it during the lesson, but then a little bit later on when they're asked to practice something independently, they're lost and they can't do it correctly at all and they start missing all the questions. So why does this happen? It's mostly because the skill itself was never really stabilized, never really fully learned. So there is truth that when students first learn something, they can learn it fairly briefly and understand it at that time, but that doesn't mean they're going to perform it reliably later on. And that's why guided practice matters so much because it allows them to apply the skill, get some feedback, that get their mistakes corrected, and it strengthens their understanding. And by giving independent work too early on, it just creates confusion and basically it takes away support that students need too early on for them to fully develop that skill. And that's why that model is so important where as a teacher or an adult, you first have to model the skill that they're working on and then basically have guided practice where you guide them along about what to do and make sure you give them feedback and correct the errors as well. That helps with learning most. And the most important thing is as students are learning something new, we don't just abandon them mid-process. We keep guiding them along and gradually give them independence, but not too early on. Now, review and retrieval are very important to create durable learning. So, we've all seen the situation where there's a child who can do a skill 1 week, and then maybe a week or two later, they forget it, completely forget it. Happened all the time. But why does this happen and why do we see it? It's very common for a student to actually perform the skill well during a lesson and then later on they just don't have it down. And the reason why is because any skill gets stronger with review and retrieval, which means kind of they're asked to do the skill again much later on down the road. Review is really important. It's not busy work. It's how learning becomes more durable. And for students to really get a skill down or to really improve their learning, that retrieval needs to happen and the review for it needs to be spaced out to well after the skill has been taught, and that creates more durable learning. Without that review and also cumulative review of multiple skills, in a way, the skills are just rented for a bit. Like they look good in the moment, but they won't last weeks or months later. And that's why retrieval and review and cumulative review are so important for learning. Now, there's this misconception that explicit instruction, it prevents independence, but actually it's the opposite. Explicit instruction will eventually lead towards students being more independent. Because the goal of explicit instruction is to eventually not have any dependence on a teacher or the adult. And in fact, it leads them to have more knowledge, more fluency, more confidence, and therefore they have less need for support over time. Usually, most teaching progression goes with an I do, then we do, and then you do. And I'm sure almost all teachers know this and they've heard it a lot, but it is this gradual release of responsibility from the teacher to the student. But the key word is gradual. Like it's not within 10 minutes. And especially in the I do and we do. The I do is just modeling the whole process. We do is the guided practice where we're working on the skill together, and that way they get a lot of feedback with the skill that they're practicing. Eventually, the you do it has to come after the first two, though, and hence again that explicit instruction eventually leads to that you do, that independence to do the work. And not only independence to do the work, but then apply that into many different situations and more complex situations or more complex problems to solve. So with all of this, independence is the destination, but guidance is part of the path to get there. So as a parent, what should you look for in strong instruction? Well, if you're seeing things that maybe look trendy, they look open-ended, they tell students to, find their own strategy to solve this and explain all that. And then you find your child frustrated by that work just a few minutes later. Hopefully this helps explain why. But the whole point of explicit instruction is to make the learning process clear as possible. And again, part of that is the guided practice so that a student can practice that skill multiple times along with the teacher, hear their thinking, see them model it out, have their questions answered along with that as well. And again, the nice thing about guided practice for the student is that no matter what, teacher will essentially work them through to the answer so that they all kind of agree upon it. They're not left completely on their own. But the other important things to talk about with explicit instruction, there needs to be review, a lot of spaced out review. So basically, once a skill is taught, has to you have to basically go back and practice it again weeks later, months later. That retrieval of that skill is important, and how you space that out is also really important. That's what makes it durable, where it can be applied to many and almost all situations. It helps to avoid the whole, well, they got it last week. What's wrong this week? So, the main takeaway from all this, explicit instruction is meant to give students clarity. It's meant to build up their knowledge, their fluency, their confidence in something until eventually they will gradually get independence from it. It's not meant to take away any independence or creativity from them. And not only that, I think most of us understand that because we see it in so many other situations, especially if you take the example of musicians and athletes. It would just be wrong to just ask them to figure it out or explain their thinking on a certain topic if they're never given the chance to practice the skills up front to begin with. When we explain clearly what they need to do and model the process for them and gradually release independence to them over time, that's what good learning should look like. And that's why we here at the Lil Will Learning Company focus so much on structured academic systems for reading, writing, and math. Because we feel that parents shouldn't have to guess at what skill may be missing for their child. And we don't think that students should have to discover skills that they were never fully taught to begin with. Our academic systems are designed to make learning clear and to eventually have students become lifelong independent learners. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, take care.